Okay, so last lesson we looked at how to use an image in order to set it as the texture. We're actually going to go through that again. I think it's a really complicated skill and I wouldn't want you to get lost. So here we have our brand new Blender page. We're going to get rid of the cube that starts the page. From the top down menu, which is 7, we're going to add a mesh plane. Okay, we're going to size that plane to make it bigger. We're going to add a mesh sphere. We're going to check on the side view and we're going to see that that's too low. So we're going to grab it and put it onto where the plane was. Okay. And now if we render it, we'll see that we've got our ball sitting on the sphere. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to smooth. Remember, it gets rid of some of the choppiness. So with the sphere selected, we're going to go into the edit button and we're going to set smooth. You just push it once. It actually doesn't look like you've pushed it, but pushing it once does it. And then we're going to go into the shading and add the texture. Now here's something that's easy to miss. You can't go right to the texture button. Okay, there's nothing there to use, and that's because every texture is connected to a material. So in order to have a texture, you have to have a material first. So you add new material. Okay, and that's actually all you have to do. And then when you go into texture, you can add new texture. The texture type is image. We're going to load the image. We're going to go into our drive where we have the picture taken. Blender, metal, and select image. That gives us this. We're going to go to the floor. We're going to add a texture. In this case, we're going to add the floor texture, image, load, and old floor. And this is where we left off last time. There's a couple things, though, about these textures that we can, there's a ton of things that we can modify from here on. First of all, it may be that when you look at this floor, it makes the marble look too big or small because the boards are the size that they are. What it's going to do by default is it's going to take your image and it's going to stretch it the length and the width of the space that you've given it to stretch it. And so if these boards are too big, the only way to make them smaller is to use more than one of these pictures to tile the area. So if you look under Edit and then Textures, you see here X repeat and Y repeat. If you change X repeat and Y repeat to 3, for example, what that means is that it's going to use the image 3 times across the space and 3 times up and down along the space. So now we're actually tiling 9 of those images across the spaces that you've given it. Okay. And so when we render it, it's going to look a lot smaller. The reason why these boards look smaller is because the same image now is shrunken down so that it can be repeated 9 times over the course of the... And this is why the idea of something tiling well is important. You can see here the seam where the image starts over. And you can see this kind of watermark here is replicated again here and here. And so depending on the image, this maybe will look very choppy, or else it'll look pretty natural. But that's one of the reasons, or one of the ways that you can change the image that you've used as the texture. Another thing to keep in mind is that Blender has absolutely no idea what's on these pictures. This could be a picture of your face for all it knows. And so it doesn't really know how that image is supposed to look as it interacts with light and things like that. And that's where Spec and Hardness can come into play. Take, for instance, this idea of the ball. It's a metal ball, and so metal bounces off light very differently than it bounces off wood. And you can change the hardness and the spec of the object this way. Okay, so for example, if I click on the ball and I go under the shading menu, and then I'm going to click on the materials button here. Okay. Under the materials button, there's a tab that says shaders. If I click on shaders, I'll see these 2 lines here, spec and hardness. Spec has to do with kind of how reflective the material is. So if you look over here in my preview window, when I make the spec very low, it means that there's no real reflection off of that object. Okay? And if I render it, you'll see that. Okay? You'll see that the object now is very dull. This makes it look almost like it's a rubber, a rubber bouncy ball or something like that. Whereas if I go back in and set the spec to 2, it'll be very reflective. Okay, so now when I render it, you can see that light is really gleaming off of this ball. Hardness is a little bit more subtle, but let me show you how hardness works. If I change the hardness of something, it has to do with how focused that speck will be. Okay, so the closer hardness is to 1, the bigger that shininess will get. Okay, and if I set it to the the very highest, it's a very defined point. Okay, so we can change those images. Watch how bad the floor actually looks if I increase its spec. Now here in the preview, remember it's set for the type of object that it is. So we want to tell it that it's an X and Y sphere. You wouldn't want your dull hardwood floor to have a high spec level, because look what that does. In fact, the spec is kind of here, but it renders the floor as a little bit more shiny than you'd want it, whereas that looks good on the ball. Okay, so that's the second thing that you can do to control the way that these images look. I still got this tiled 3x3. Let me switch that back. The floor. I'm going to go into the materials, and I'm going to do. Now we've been moving these bars around. You can slide it to the left and slide it to the right. That's the way to change the number. Or you can click on the right side of it, or click on the left side of it. A third way to do it is to click on the object itself, and it'll pull up a cursor. So you can just change that number by typing on the number pad. You can change that to 1. So anyways, if I move this light really close, and I have the spec of the floor turned up high, you'll see that the floor is kind of bouncing off the light. And we wouldn't want that to happen at all. I mean, what kind of old wood floor is that polished? And so we can fix that by taking the spec of this light, which remember is under the shaders tab, under the material tab, and moving that spec way down. If it's completely 0, then it won't reflect light, in any kind of focused way. Okay, so now we've created a ball that looks a lot more shiny than we have the floor, and that's kind of how we want it.